go to incremental debt payments. After we make that debt payment, it's $873 million overall. You told me that this should be split roughly 50-50 between water rates and impact fees. I've let the debt go over 30 years, as you're probably well aware, certainly from the impact fees that we looked at before. That debt can extend over a 50-year time horizon, right? If we look at the cost of construction, I have not currently built, and I don't know that we're going to have time to go through the cost of construction with only 10 minutes left. It's going to be a little bit difficult. But let's look at the cost of construction here, or excuse me, the cost of conservation, not the cost of construction. You've essentially said that that should also be roughly 50-50. Again, I'm not going to model that. You'll recall when we looked previously, the answer was no to all of those questions. So let's see. Okay, so here's our model. I'm just going to make a couple of adjustments as we go through. Bear with me for just a moment. We need to make our initial capital payment. You know what, I'm going to push it just a little bit further out because we don't have enough years to get all of the construction completed. So what I'm going to do, respecting what our answers were, and I offer that in terms of being very respectful of that overall, I'm going to increase our conservation just a little bit. Right? I'm going to take us up to what the governor said that we needed to do. Right? And I'm going to imagine that maybe we can get a little bit further than that, maybe another 10%, 275, by the time we get to oh, that's the wrong way, isn't it? Sorry. Thank you. I'm going to imagine we can get about here by the time we get to 2050, 2060, okay? Come here, go to a financing plan. And we now have the ability to construct it. I now need to go back in here. Oops, excuse me, I'm going to need to make my capital payment in 2021. Okay. I need to make my capital payment here. Well, I actually need to make it in 2020. Forgive me. Whoops. That's a long time. Okay, so now what have we done here? I'll make this a little larger to make it at least somewhat easier to read. We have all of the exact same assumptions that we looked at before. Every one of those is included here for purposes of our model. Again, same model we walked through earlier today with one of the economists, respecting the fact that we tried to build, again, on the good things that they did and reflect some of the differences. We've looked at what the effective supply is and what the effective demand is associated with that water. We've looked at what the cumulative water is. We've looked at where we need to take incremental water out of the Lake Powell pipeline. We're going to use it. You're already kind of dipping into those reserves, but if we look at that in terms of when we'd have to start making investments, the capital construction costs, of course, happen very early overall. In terms of the construction has to happen almost immediately in order to get the project fully constructed and online by the time you need it. You'll notice here you have demand for this water when you actually need it. And again, I realize you can't read all of this. Bear with me. I'll try and get you through as much of it as we can, respecting we have about 5 minutes before we have to conclude. Right? You have the initial payment that you make. I have allowed that initial payment to carry through. You then have to make all of these payments each year based on the number of ERUs that you will ultimately be demanding. We have assumed that this is pay-as-you-go financing. Right? This is a pay-as-you-go, which means that for the initial $98 million, you're going to pay $38 million in terms of a cash sale for land. Right? You're going to have to, $48 million for a cash sale from land. You're going to get an additional $6 million from annual impact fees, and water rates are going to be another $9.6, just given what we talked about before. Now, what do the water rates need to be in order to achieve that? About 8 cents per 1,000 gallons, right? In order to accomplish that, in terms of what needs to be achieved, that's 8 cents per 1,000 gallons in order to generate that money. If you started today and essentially carried it forward, that's about what you need. That gets you $9.6 million over that timeline. what would the impact fee need to be? In order to have $96 million additional dollars, again, respecting the fact that you're getting $48 million from the sale of land, you'd have to have an incremental impact fee of about $2,236 in order to get that through this plan. So essentially then you finance that in its totality. We've also allowed for the rates, as you talked about before, to carry all the way through in order for the impact fees. And again, I've allowed the impact fees to be adjusted here over time, but in order to allow those impact fees, and let's be clear, if you're going to get 86,000 acre feet out of a $1 billion project, you're talking about $11,000 per acre foot. Right, just to put it into perspective, we wanted to load some of that on here, not all of it, but some of it onto this. We've made a $100 million payment. We're only paying down what we need. Right? This is pay-go financing in terms of the capital that we have to put in. That is, every year when there's another connection to the grid, they've got to pay, looks like it starts at about $2,700, ramps all the way up to just under $5,000, not $20,000, about $5,000 in order to pay it off, and we are loading a substantial amount. You recall what 75% of the cost on to those impact fees. In addition to that, we have to then also make our bond payments. And you'll notice what makes this significantly different than what the economist model provided is that if we work our way all the way down, you'll notice that our debt grows over time. We have all these bonds that happen, and then that debt goes down over time. Why? Because that's how the Lake Powell pipeline works. You're not bearing interest on the front end, you're bearing the interest at the time at which you actually utilize it. There's a lot of numbers on this schedule. We need to take a lot more time to get there. But what is the punchline? Number one, the cost isn't anywhere near what's provided in some of these other reports that have been out there. Two reasons. One, you don't have to bear the interest from day one. Two, you're not going to take the water down until you need it. Three, you have the ability to spread that over both fees and fees in terms of connection fees or impact fees and rates. So if we carry this all the way down, we see what the costs are per capita, what they are in terms of increased rate, and they're not immaterial. I'm not here to suggest to you that they're immaterial. We're talking about a cost of about 25 cents per 1,000 gallons. That's not immaterial given where you are today. We're talking about impact fees that are relatively material over time, $4,000. So that's relatively significant. If we compare, again, this is what that financing plan looks like. You'll notice that it ramps up at the point at which you have completed. You still have debt that you have to repay, and then that goes down. These are all of your impact fees that you pay during that same time. You have to repay the $900 million that you're going to, that's ultimately going to be the construction cost of that project, but you don't have to bear any more interest than you choose to borrow. We can change our model in 1,000 different ways. We can make it all pay as you go if you really wanted to, but at the end of the day, this is the reality of what we're looking at. If we compare against what this is the total loaded, no impact fees, 100% of the cost, loaded all on to the rates. This is what the Economist Plan 1 looks like. That's the Economist Plan 2 that I showed you, and this is what it actually looks like in the model that we just presented. You'll notice that our blue line, which represents the exercise we just went through, is substantially lower than both the green line and the red line. Again, we look at it differently, and we look at rate costs, or we look at connection fees. In every case, they're lower, and they should be, because we're distributing it not on one of the categories, but rather distributing it over multiple categories and not bearing this huge interest cost. If we compare what the economists provided in their model, that's shown here, right? $2.90, 71 cents in terms of water rates. If we look at it here, it's about 36 cents. Annual cost per capita is about $93. The cost per household per month is about $22.77. And then if we look over there in terms of incremental ERUs, impact fees, we're looking at about $4,000 overall. Again, I would suggest that in comparison, respecting the fact that there is much we still need to do, those are not quite as high. If we compare what your water rates are today versus what those water rates would be, right? We've got the current water rate is